Kemper blandly offered to take Miss Gray into his boat, saying that he feared my boat was overcrowded, what with the paraphernalia, the folding cages, Grew, Miss Gray, and myself. I sat on that suggestion, but offered to take my own tiller and lend him Grew. He couldn't wriggle out of it, seeing that his alleged motive had been the overcrowding of my boat, but he looked rather sick when Grew went aboard his boat. As for me, I hoisted sail with something so near to a chuckle that it surprised me, and I looked at Evelyn Gray to see whether she had noticed the unseemly symptom. Apparently she had not. She sat forward, her eyes fixed soulfully upon the moon. Had I been dedicated to any profession except a scientific one, but let that pass. Grew in Kemper's sailboat led, and my boat followed out into the silvery and purple dusk, now all sparkling under the high lustre of the moon. Dimly I saw vast rafts of wild duck part and swim leisurely away to port and starboard, leaving a glittering lane of water for us to sail through. Into the scintillant night from the sea sprang mullet, silvery, quivering, falling back into the wash with a splash. Here and there in the moonlight steered ominous black triangles, circling us, leading us, sheeting across bow and flashing wake, all phosphorescent with lambent sea fire, the fins of great sharks. "You need have no fear," I said to the pretty waitress. She said nothing. "Of course, if you are afraid," I added, "perhaps you might care to change your seat." There was no room in the stern where I sat. "Do you think there is any danger?" she asked. "From sharks?" "Yes." "Reaching up and biting you?" "Yes." "Oh, I don't really suppose there is," I said, managing to convey the idea, I am ashamed to say, that the catastrophe was a possibility. She came over and seated herself beside me. I was very much ashamed of myself, but I could not repress a triumphant glance ahead at the other boat, where Kemper sat huddled forward, evidently bored to extinction. Every now and then I could see him turn and crane his neck, as though in an effort to distinguish what was going on in our boat. There was nothing going on, absolutely nothing. The moon was magnificent, and I think the pretty waitress must have been a little tired, for her head drooped and nodded at moments, even while I was talking to her about a specimen of Euplectilla speciosa, on which I had written a monograph. So she must have been really tired, for the subject was interesting. "You won't incommode my operations with sheet and tiller," I said to her kindly, "if you care to rest your head against my shoulder." Evidently she was very tired, for she did so, and closed her eyes. After a while, fearing that she might fall over backward into the sea, but let that pass, I don't know whether or not Kemper could distinguish anything aboard our boat. He craned his head enough to twist it off his neck. To be so utterly, so blindly devoted to science is a great safeguard for a man. Single-mindedness, however, need not induce atrophy of every humane impulse. I drew the pretty waitress closer. Not that the night was cold, but it might become so. Changes in the tropics come swiftly. It is well to be prepared. Her cheek felt very soft against my shoulder. There seemed to be a faint perfume about her hair. It really was odd how subtly fragrant she seemed to be, almost, perhaps, a matter of scientific interest. Her hands did not seem to be chilled. They did seem unusually smooth and soft. I said to her, "When at home, I suppose your mother tucks you in, doesn't she?" "Yes," she nodded sleepily. "And what does she do then?" said I, with something of that ponderous playfulness with which I make scientific jokes at a meeting of the Bronx Anthropological Association when I preside. "She kisses me and turns out the light," said Evelyn Gray innocently. I don't know how much Kemper could distinguish. He kept dodging about and twisting his head until I really thought it would come off, unless it had been screwed on like the top of a piano stool. A few minutes later he fired his pistol twice, and Evelyn sat up. I never knew why he fired. He never offered any explanation. Toward midnight I could hear the roar of breakers on our starboard bow. Evelyn heard them too, and sat up inquiringly. "Grew has found the inlet to Black Bayou, I suppose," said I. And it proved to be the case, for, with the surf thundering on either hand, we sailed into a smoothly flowing inlet through which the flood tide was running between high dunes, all sparkling in the moonlight and crowned with shadowy palms. Occasionally I heard noises ahead of us from the other boat, as though Kemper was trying to converse with us, but as his apropos was as unintelligible as it was inopportune, I pretended not to hear him. Besides, I had all I could do to maneuver the tiller and prevent Evelyn Gray from falling off backward into the bayou. Besides, it is not customary to converse with the man at the helm. After a while, during which I seemed to distinguish in Kemper's voice a quality that rhymes with his name, his tones varied through phases all the way from irony to exasperation. After a while he gave it up and took to singing. There was a moon, and I suppose he thought he had a voice. It didn't strike me so. After several somewhat melancholy songs, he let off with his pistol 2 or 3 times and then subsided into silence. I didn't care. Neither his songs nor his shots interrupted, but let that pass also. We were now sailing into the forest through pool after pool of interminable lagoons, startling into unseen and clattering flight hundreds of waterfowl. I could feel the wind from their whistling wings in the darkness as they drove by us out to sea. It seemed to startle the pretty waitress. It is a solemn thing to be responsible for a pretty girl's peace of mind. I reassured her continually, perhaps a trifle nervously. But there were no more pistol shots. Perhaps Kemper had used up his cartridges. We were still drifting along under drooping sails, borne inland almost entirely by the tide, when the first pale, watery grey light streaked the east. When it grew a little lighter, Evelyn sat up, all danger of sharks being over. Also, I could begin to see what was going on in the other boat, which was nothing remarkable. Kemper slumped against the mast, his head turned in our direction. Grew sat at the helm, motionless, his tattered straw hat sagging on his neck. When the sun rose, I called out cheerily to Kemper, asking him how he had passed the night. Evelyn also raised her head, pausing while bringing her disordered hair under discipline to listen to his reply. But he merely mumbled something. Perhaps he was still sleepy. As for me, I felt exceedingly well, and when Grew turned his craft inshore I did so too, and when, under the overhanging foliage of the forest, the nose of my boat grated on the sand, I rose and crossed the deck with a step distinctly frolicsome. Kemper seemed distant and glum. Evelyn Gray spoke to him shyly now and then, and I noticed she looked at him only when he was gazing elsewhere than at her. She had a funny, conciliatory air with him, half ashamed, partly humorous and amused, as though something about Kemper's sulky ill-humor was continually making tiny inroads on her gravity. Some mullet had jumped into the 2 boats, half a dozen during our moonlight voyage, and these were now being fried with rice for us by Grew. Lord, how I hated to eat them. After we had finished breakfast, Grew, as usual, did everything to the remainder except to get into the frying-pan with both feet, and, as usual, he sickened me. When he'd cleaned up everything, I sent him off into the forest to find a dry shell mound for camping purposes. Then I made fast both boats, and Kemper and I carried ashore our paraphernalia, spare batterie de cuisine, firearms, fishing tackle,